Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for another poetry discussion, which will take place in two separate playlists here on the channel. Obviously, the poetry discussion playlist. We are now over 200 poetry discussions in this playlist, but also the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of Emily Dickinson poems and poetry discussions. Today, we are here. I'm in a bit of a somber mood. We're here to read I Measure Every Grief I Meet. And we're going to talk about it. I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine, or has an easier size. I wonder if they bore it long, or did it just begin. I could not tell the date of mine. It feels so old a pain. I wonder if it hurts to live, and if they have to try, and whether could they choose between. It would not be to die. I note that some, gone patient long, at length renew their smile, an imitation of a light that has so little oil. I wonder if, when years have piled some thousands on the harm that hurt them early, such a lapse could give them any balm. Or would they go on aching still through centuries of nerve, enlightened to a larger pain in contrast with the love? The grieved are many, I am told. There is the various cause. Death is but one, and comes but once, and only nails the eyes. There's grief of want and grief of cold, a sort they call despair. There's banishment from native eyes, in sight of native air. And though I may not guess the kind correctly, yet to me a piercing comfort it affords in passing Calvary, to note the fashions of the cross and how they're mostly worn, still fascinated to presume that some are like my own. How many kinds of grief are there? And do we distinguish them from one another? There's the old adage that Eskimos have 100 words for snow or whatever. And that makes sense, right? There are certain types of snow in which you would not want to go hunting. There are other types of snow in which it would be okay. To not define them, to not differentiate between the two, could be life and death. But grief, sadness, despair, are these different things, or are they just different words for the same thing? Is all grief the same? Emily Dickinson spends much time here attempting to differentiate, but nails down to only differentiating size. Everything else is just speculation. I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes and wonder if it weighs like mine or has an easier size. But many of the other differentiations, time, I wonder if they bore it long or did it just begin? There's no real attempt to make an older pain a greater pain. It seems so. For example, to go back to the snow example, a wet snow, and a lot of it, means something different than cold, hard snow, sleet type snow. Those are different things. They mean different things. You do different things through them. You prepare for them differently. You travel through them differently. The length of that wet snow, how long it has been snowing, it piles up and up and up. The longer it goes on, the higher the snow gets. The height is not the weight of the snow, by the way. The weight, the measuring, is different. The duration, it does not seem, of grief, it does not seem to matter much. It seems to me, there's the old saying of hell, that seconds in hell feels like eternity. Is that how grief is? So that once that grief is revisited, once that grief is renewed, how long we've suffered, it does not matter. Are we left to just scar over the grief? Do we have to assume that the grief will still be there? Do we have to try to ignore the grief? I don't know. It seems to me that this thing called grief doesn't seems more like a place, right? And so this is part of the brilliance of Emily Dickinson, is that she's able to make grief a morsel. Emily Dickinson is able to reconceptualize something in a way that we would not otherwise see it. I measure every grief I meet. Who ever measured a grief? But it works. The phrase works. Making us play with it in our mind works. Making us do the work works. Especially since she has created this scaffolding for examining grief without ever necessarily having to experience it. So this is one of the things that is so confounding about Emily Dickinson. You hear all the time in writing, show us, don't tell us. You don't tell us Andy is grieving. You show us Andy stooped, Andy's shoulders brought in. You show us Andy's hands together. You show us the defeated individual. We will infer the grieving. But Emily Dickinson does not operate in that fashion. I measure every grief I meet. She just gives it to us. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb. She gives us that. She doesn't show us, I died for a rose. I died for my lover. She doesn't give us the beautiful thing. She says beauty. I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes. Do you think that is because we are constantly trying to fit in? And if we are grieving, if we find ourselves lost in the hell that is grief, if we find ourselves in that layer of hell, the grieving layer of hell, if we find ourselves there, grieving no matter what it is, it could be something simple, it could be something we never thought we would lose, a friendship, something such as this. When we find ourselves there, we want to imagine we are not alone. We want to imagine everyone is there with us. We want to imagine that everyone's life must be turned upside down. We want to imagine that the only world which exists is the world of grief if we find it ourselves inescapable. Maybe. Maybe that's the point of measuring every grief you meet. Maybe that's the point of wandering. Does it weigh like yours? Is every grief as great as yours? Emily Dickinson does not answer that. She doesn't have to. Emily Dickinson sets this whole thing up in order to leave us with the quandary still fascinated to presume that some are like my own. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you enjoy what I do here, hitting the like button really helps me out on this channel. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more. Literature is the only thing I do here. Poetry every Mondays. I have novel read-alongs going on and all sorts of other stuff. I drop enough videos, and I hope to have you back for the next one.